What about now, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, everybody? Anybody can hear me? Yes? Good, thank you. Then we can start with the Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming for this very important and very useful and very enjoyable workshop, inshallah. The workshop is again about research methodology, as you can see Dr. Nashwa's screen. It targets mostly the graduate students and those who are interested in research and graduate and postgraduate studies. The workshop is going to be presented by Dr. Nashwa Saati. Dr. Nashwa Saati is an assistant professor at the English Language Institute at King Abdulaziz University. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy the presentation, hopefully. Dr. Nashwa, if you are ready, the floor is yours. The best of luck. And have a nice time, everybody.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to the Academic Writing Center for the invitation and for the opportunity to present this workshop today. I am very happy and grateful to be here with you. As you can see, this is dedicated to the research methodology chapters or sections, whether in your thesis or in your papers or assignments and so forth. Before we start, I just would like to say something. I am an assistant professor in TESOL, Teaching English for Speaking Other Languages, which means I come from an educational social sciences background. So forgive me if I don't know much about other fields, but what I'm going to present today is a very general approach to writing a research methodology. So hopefully you will benefit from it. Okay, so we're going to start with some definitions that I think are important to discuss before we venture in the structure of the methodology chapter or section. And then finally, just a few tips that I usually even give to my students, my MA students, with regarding to writing the research methodology chapters or sections. With each section, with each part of the presentation, I'm just going to pause for a bit for questions or for comments or anything. But also, if you have any questions and you want to type it in the chat, please do. Before we actually start, I just want to share this very, very lengthy quote, but I think it's a very important one. So the secret to writing the method section is to be able to describe the materials you used in your experiment and or the methods you used to carry out your research in a way that is sufficiently detailed to enable others in your field to easily follow your method and, if desired, even replicate your work. A key skill is to make sure that the descriptions are complete and yet are also as concise as possible. So this is basically the general purpose of your methodology or methods chapter. So it is basically a description of what you have done throughout your research process. And one of the main things is for you to show your audience, whether they are your examiners or your peers or anyone who is reading your research, how you did what you said you claim that you did. In order for them to possibly follow your method, to replicate your method exactly, which is, I think, what we do when we actually read papers. We look at the method section sometimes for inspiration and sometimes for ideas and sometimes even for validation, and making sure that what we're doing is correct and we are on the right track. But just to be sure that the methodology section needs to be concise. So yes, it has to be detailed, but it has to also be concise as much as possible. Now, if you notice, I keep saying methodology, method, methodology, method, and this is what I mean in terms of we have to define methodology and method. So I'm just going to ask you, is there a difference between methodology and method, and between methodology chapters and method chapters or sections? Okay, Renine thinks yes. Anyone else? Just by looking at the two words, methodology, more general. In what way general? Yes, there is a difference. Methodology is a workflow of the research, but the method is a tool and function used. Okay, yes, to a degree, yes. Yes, qualitative, well, we'll see. I think methodology requires more detail. True. Okay. We'll see. There's a difference between them, but I don't know it clearly. Well, hopefully you will tonight. Method is simple, does research show, and methodology is a justification for the very good. Justification is a very important word because there is actually, well, again, to quote Dr. Rawan, it depends. It depends on the field, it depends on your conversations that you're having with your supervisors or what you read in in other articles and so forth. But usually they would say methodology and methods are two separate things, or two, not necessarily separate, but different. Sorry. So methodology actually includes the theoretical framework that underpins your research approach and which gives justification to your choices in the research process. So it includes I think there was a question also last time about theoretical approaches or theoretical and conceptual approaches or something, and what to include and not to include in these. I'm not sure about I don't remember the question very well, but anyways, so with methodology, it's more, when people said that it's more, not necessarily general, but it includes that aspect, the theoretical aspect of it. So why are we choosing, or what is the theory behind certain approaches, philosophical theories? Whereas the methods, as many of you have actually said, is the actual research instruments or tools used in the research and how they were used to collect the data. Again, depending on your field. Now, there might be, based on the discussions with your supervisors and so forth, and I think in thesis, when you're writing your thesis or you're writing your dissertation, you might need to include your theoretical framework behind the research approaches, or not. Sometimes supervisors would say, no need to do that in an MA thesis, but definitely in a doctoral dissertation or thesis. But again, it actually depends. But it is something that it's worthwhile for you to consider and to think about. No, actually. No, it is how you're going to approach it. So if you are going, and I'll give you an example. This is, again, a very general example of what I'm trying to say. Just a general example here. I'm going to go back to the other, which is looking at the different ontological and epistemological considerations when you're writing your research. So we're going to discuss it even further. But before we do that, just know that when you're writing, you have to make sure, are you writing a methodology chapter or a methods chapter, or even sometimes you can name it completely differently. Sometimes it could be more than one chapter. Again, these are things that you would have to think about and discuss with your supervisors, or think about your audience, or think about how generally the general practices within your field. Any questions? Oh, can we name different chapters with methodology? No, for my question, I don't think I understand. Okay, so any questions before we move on? It's going to become clearer a little while, in a little while. Okay, so general ideas of, again, so it is, well, again, well, if you're going to say methodology, then the methods or the instruments are going to be included within the methodology chapter. So it is, again, it is important that you write, it's a core thing, it's a core chapter or section within your paper or within your thesis. And it usually comes after the literature review. So it's an introduction literature. This is the normal kind of like position in your thesis or in your paper. After literature review, it usually takes about 15% of your overall thesis word count. Again, it depends, but the point is, it's not as big as other chapters, but it is an important chapter. Also important to use headings. I know it seems obvious, but not sometimes. Sometimes people don't really sometimes people underestimate the importance of headings, especially in the methodology chapter. And so the headings that we're going to discuss now is actually based on what is commonly accepted as the structure of a methodology chapter. Question? Okay, so the structure of your methodology chapter. Now I am going to actually use methodology chapter because I would argue that it is best to discuss even just a little bit in like an introduction to the chapter, your methodological approaches. So you have your methodological approach. You are then going to discuss your methods, and then finally data analysis. Now, again, this is not exclusive. You can add more things to your chapter depending on your study, again, depending on your field, conversations with your supervisors, what is commonly known in your discipline. But these are the main ones that have to be there, or at least the participants' methods and data analysis have to be there. More details into each structure. Okay, so this is what we mean by the methodological approach. Again, probably the quote here, but it kind of gives you an understanding how this could affect the decision that you make with regards to selecting your data or sampling your data and then collecting it and analyzing it. And epistemology are more like philosophical concepts or theoretical concepts. So ontology is basically about the nature of reality. What is reality? And the epistemological assumptions relate to knowledge itself and how and what is knowledge and who are the knowers and so forth. So this in itself gives, and we're going to see in this table, it's going to give rise to methodological considerations such as who's the knowers, and if I want to know something, who do I go to, for example. So it all kind of relates. So ontological and epistemological beliefs that you believe in would feed into the instruments that you choose to prove your, or to justify or to answer your questions, and how you are going to collect data. So for example, if you look at the table here, inductive, deductive. So do you believe, or your approach to research, is it going to be deductive or inductive? Now, again, these are general differences between quantitative and qualitative. It is not as neat as it looks here in tables. We like to keep things neat, but they are not as neat in reality. So you're going to see a lot of overlapping and and sometimes an instrument can be both, or it can be more of something than another thing. But just, again, this is just a general differences between a quantitative and a qualitative research approach. So a quantitative would be considered more deductive, where qualitative is more inductive. So with qualitative, I depend so much on the data to tell me what is it that I want to know. Whereas with a quantitative, I kind of have a theory or a hypothesis going into the research. And I want to prove that theory or hypothesis. And in terms of ontological orientation or ontological assumptions, an objective approach or an understanding is just saying that reality is there. It exists. And there's nothing I can do about it as an individual. Whereas constructionism is saying that reality is constructed by individuals or by humans. So this, I mean, you hear this a lot, my reality, my understanding, the way I see the world. So it's basically, reality is how I see it. An epistemological orientation looks at, from a quantitative approach, looks at positivism, or again, that there are certain fundamental rules that doesn't change, regardless where and how you collect the data. Where with qualitative, it is more how the researcher and how the audience would interpret the data and present it. And so what is the meaning behind the data? And this meaning depends so much on the context maybe, and the interaction between the participant and researcher, or interaction between participants, and interaction between participants and context, and so forth. So the interpretation of the data would differ depending on who is collecting the data and who is analyzing the data. Whereas a positivism approach, data interpretation or analysis will not change. So what do you think? So again, discussions of these kinds of discussion, I think may be beneficial if you would include them or not, again, depending on your field. So any questions on this part? Okay. Broadly speaking, Renine, broadly speaking. Again, this is a very general understanding of a methodological approach. Within each and every single one, there are different philosophical schools and different approaches to understanding reality and knowledge and the knowers and so forth. Deductive is basically going in with a hypothesis and wanting to, you have an idea or you have a hypothesis and you want to prove it. So you have a theory and then you want to prove it by observing a certain phenomena and so forth and writing. Whereas a deductive, it's quite opposite. You collect the data and then you continue analyzing the data until you get a theory. So the theory comes after the analysis of the data. So here the focus is on data itself. Whereas an deductive is the focus is on the method or the methodological approach. Again, this is a very broad understanding of deductive and inductive. Again, a deductive is probably more known in scientific fields. For example, you start with a theory, and then from the theory, you go into a hypothesis, collect the data, look at your findings or results, and determine if your hypothesis was confirmed or rejected. And then based on that, you would revise the theory. Whereas with an inductive, you come in, you have obviously you have an idea, you have an aim, you have your questions, but then you allow the data to tell you or to lead you towards the finding. And you don't necessarily have to reach a theory. You're doing grounded theory, which takes forever in qualitative research. But that's not necessarily the goal in qualitative research. The goal in qualitative research is to explore something, to understand something on a deeper level. Whereas a quantitative is to produce generalizable results, which means that whatever results that come out of quantitative research is something that I want to implement or apply or use over a large population. Our favorite word, it depends. Or you can use a mixture of both, which is a mixed method. But even within mixed method, which the focus is it going to be on a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach? So it's more of a qual-qual or a qual-quan approach. Linguistics, which type of linguistic studies are you referring to? Generally speaking, again, this is my own personal opinion. Relating to humans, when you're dealing with humans, there has to be a qualitative element to your, how you're going to do that is up to you. But I mean, especially in social linguistics, there's a great deal of constructing realities or constructing certain concepts, words, and so forth, depending on the society, the context, and or the group, the social group that the person belongs to. So you need to think of that as well. So it's not extremely subjective. It's not extremely objective, where you can just observe. Also, are you an insider, outsider? So are you part of the sample? Are you a member of that group, or are you not? A general example of it's further on. We're going to look at different examples of quantitative and qualitative instruments that you would have to describe in your methodology section. Again, it depends. It depends. Again, what is the aim of your research? A very simple approach. Do you want generalizable results?
What about the
Do you want results, or do you want to have further understanding of a specific phenomenon. I think someone has their mic on. But in my case, and for example, in our case, in my field, for example, I also, part of it is second language acquisition. Like part of my field is studying and researching second language acquisition. So it's a form of applied linguistics, or it's a branch of applied linguistics. So based on, for example, if you're going to look at motivation, if you're going to look at student motivation, for example, you want to see if students, if I use a certain teaching style or teaching strategy, then this would motivate students. And because the aim is because you want to apply this to all, and you want to present it as something that any teacher in any context could use and apply. Then you would have to use quantitative approaches. However, if you want to study a specific group or a specific phenomena and so forth, that would be a more qualitative, because the aim is not to present or to produce generalizable results. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is in terms of, so you argue what kind, again, depending on your research questions and research aim, and what is it that you want to do with your research. And then you present it, or you want to do quantitative, qualitative approaches. And again, within the quantitative and qualitative approaches, there are other different like schools of thought, and in terms of like the theoretical framework that you can use, and again, they differ from one field to another. And then you're going to talk about your participants, which is your sample. Again, participants in social sciences, I'm not sure in natural sciences how this would work, but in social sciences, you are going to talk about how you sampled. And first of all, who are they? Why you chose them, and who and how did you choose them? So that's the sampling, and the sample size. Now the sample size would differ. Again, in a quantitative approach, you would want a larger size that represents the population. So who is the population here? Say for example, the population is the preparatory year students, and there are around 6,000 students. So you would have to calculate a sample size that would represent the population. So the sample would represent a population. So in a quantitative approaches, usually sample size are big, depending also on population, but they are still big. There are certain ways to calculate. I also have to say something which I didn't say at the beginning. I come from a qualitative background. So I'm not, I mean, obviously I understand quantitative approaches, but yeah, the nitty-gritty stuff, you would need to ask someone else. So I'm sure there is a way to calculate sample size in quantitative research. A statistical thing, which I don't know how. But in a qualitative approach, sample size are usually smaller, but data is bigger and richer and more descriptive. So for example, I could have between 15 to 30 participants, and however, for each participant, I would sit down with them and do several not several, I would do, for example, 3 interviews and as much as follow-up interviews as I need. And the interviews could last up to an hour and a half. And then also I can ask them, I don't know, for writing samples, for drawings, depending on your research instruments. You can also add observation to that. So you're observing them in their in the setting, whether it's a classroom or other setting, depending on your research. And that itself is also added to your data. Any other types of data can be included. So for each and every single participant, you have a great deal of data. So even though sample size is small, that doesn't mean that your data is going to be small. So again, these are the things that you would need to justify. So if you justify a quantitative approach, then your sample, it kind of becomes, you would have to justify the sample size and vice versa. And also, you need to actually write something about your participants. Who are they? So obviously the common one is gender, age, sociocultural background, and then other depending on your research aim. So other factors that would have a substantial impact or significance in your research. Say, for example, in second language acquisition, L2 proficiency would factor in it. Their second language learning experiences might factor in it as well. We might also think about the L1. What is their L1 and what is the L2? So if it's from a different family, for example, like Arabic and English, then we'll probably expect different results than, say, for example, if it's French and, I don't know, Italian. So again, the other aspects that or the other characteristics that you need to include also depend, maybe nationality is something that you might, or not necessarily nationality, but the social groups that they belong to within the context, the communities that they belong to, that they identify, religious preferences, again, if this relates to your research. So if this relates to, if you're actually going to mention it, and if it's a huge, it does have an impact in terms of how you're going to discuss your results, then yes. If not, it becomes irrelevant. What do I mean by sampling approaches? There are different sampling approaches. Again, depending on your field, depending on the aim of your study, depending on what is common practices within your field. For example, is it going to be random? You're just going to pick and choose anyone. When I said, for example, that I specifically wanted to look at preparatory year students, then it makes sense that my sample would be preparatory year students. So I'm specifically looking at preparatory year students. If I specifically want a specific gender, then I would say, for example, I'm looking at female learners, then I would specifically go after female learners. It doesn't make sense asking male learners and vice versa. So again, so the characteristics, no, the sample means your participants. The participants or the thing that you're going to study. I think in sciences حتكون, in natural sciences حتكون different. For example, if you're going to study viruses, your sample is going to be the virus. If you're going to study humans, then your sample is going to be human beings. So yes, a sample is a part of the population. So for example, my whole population would be preparatory year students. So all students who were admitted to KAU University, first year students. But it would be impossible for me to collect data from all of them. What I can do is I collect data from a representation. Yes, Ajwad, thank you so much. A representation of the population. As again, do I want something that is generalizable, then I would have a large sample size. Yani the number of people that I want to collect the data from has to be big. If generalizability is not an issue, but a deeper understanding of a specific phenomena or a specific case, then I would focus on people or participants that have the characteristics or the things that I actually am looking for in my research. Ragad, it depends. Do you care about who writes the tweets? So are you going to look only at the tweets and you are going to analyze the text only? Or are you going to look at who wrote the tweets and maybe you want to sit down with a couple of them or a few of them and understand why they wrote what they wrote? They're not the sample. The sample is the text. But again, it depends on your field. If your field is just looking at textual data, and in this case, we probably refer to it as data as opposed to sample. We would refer to it more as data. So text here becomes data. Participants or the sample are individual, are humans. Okay, so another thing which is participant profiles, and this would only be included in qualitative. 15 participants, 15 individuals. Sometimes, because, by the way, qualitative research is very, very descriptive. So you're going to describe so many things, and this is why usually you have a larger word count than a non-qualitative or a quantitative studies or dissertations or theses or whatever. So sometimes people would actually, for each participant, obviously you're not going to write their name or you're not going to identify them in any way, shape, or form. So you're going to give them a nickname or pseudonym or whatever, and then you are going to describe each and every participant. If this would be relevant to your study, so it depends. So participant profiles, usually in qualitative, if kind of like describing each an individual or each participant is going to affect your study and it relates to your research questions and research aims. Any questions? Okay, great. We will move on now to the second part, which is the research instruments or research material. Again, generally speaking, quantitative methods or qualitative methods. And by method here, I mean actual instruments. So the actual tools that I use to collect data. Okay, so again, it's depending on your research, depending on how you approach it. Maybe you want to do something completely novel and different. By all means, go ahead and do it. But usually quantitative methods, the very common one would be the questionnaire surveys or surveys. or questionnaires, depending on how you refer to them. So, which is very, again, we as people would, which is what common? What do you mean? What do you mean by, do you mean the methods or the approach? I'm so sorry. Or not sorry, this is reality. It does depend, yes, exactly, on your topic, your research questions, your research aims, what is commonly the research approaches or practices within your field, what your supervisor thinks that you should do, what you prefer to do. Again, there's a huge part of what you love and what you enjoy doing, by the way. I'm a person who appreciates and understands the importance of quantitative approaches. However, I find myself and I enjoy doing qualitative research. And you can see other people who feel completely different than I feel. But then again, this could also be something to factor in as well. Sometimes the common practice within your field is doing quantitative method, but you are going to challenge that and you're going to use an alternative qualitative method. As long as you're able to justify your choices, which relates to your methodological approach, then you're fine. Something that I tell my students all the time is make sure you can choose whatever you want to do as long as you're able to have a questionnaire. Okay, so questionnaires largely depends on numbers. Thank you, Bandar. But again, it depends. We have a questionnaire. They give you a very common one is an online questionnaire. So basically, it consists of numbers. So if you choose agree, neither agree or disagree, or agree, for each choice you would assign a number. Agree would be, for example, 3. Neither agree or disagree would be 2, and then disagree would be 1. So you are going to statistically calculate, for example, the number of people who agree or disagree with the statement. For example, I think is an easy language to learn. مثلا, I think English is an easy language to learn. Agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree. So by the end, when you give a large number of questionnaires to a large number of people, and you get the results, you can, for example, whether the majority of the people, the majority of the population, think English is an easy language to learn or not. Now, this is a very basic approach to quantitative, whether they think English is easy to learn or not. And then the reason why I want to know is based on that, do I improve the books? Do I improve the teaching? Do I make it easier for them? How do I make it easier for them? And so forth. I'm so sorry. Let me just see if I can fix that. Just a second. Hi, so let me know if this is better. Okay, do I need to repeat anything? Let me know if I need to repeat anything. The questionnaire example. Okay, so I want to know if people in Jeddah, for example, not Jeddah is a huge example. If I think preparatory year students at KAU University think that English or the English course is an easy course, for example. So what do? I give them an online questionnaire, for example, where I ask them, I think English or the English program or the English course is easy. No, quantitative means I think we need. I think you need a workshop in terms of looking at the difference between questionnaires and so forth. But I'll continue. Okay, so the number, for example, I agree, I disagree, neither agree nor agree. Okay, so for example, these are your options: agree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree. Okay, so I send out the questionnaire. When I receive the questionnaire, I start to change agree and assign a number to it. Agree is going to be 3. Neither agree nor disagree is going to be 2. Disagree is going to be 1. But I'm going to see, for example, how many people said that they agree that English is difficult. So the more people, say they agree, so the more people choose 3 exactly, means that the majority of the first year students at KAU think that statement is true or false, or the statement or the course is easy or not. Okay? Pretty much so, yes. Exactly. So now if I want to know why they think that English is easy, then I start to do, probably I have to add a qualitative element where I sit with a sample, which is a smaller sample than the qualitative, and then I ask them, why do you think? I just conduct interviews. So if you see here, the commonly accepted qualitative method would be interviews, literally sitting down. Yes, sitting down with someone and asking them questions. So in the quantitative section, in the research instrument, if it's quantitative, then you have to talk about how you designed your questionnaire. What are the items that you include? Did you pilot your questionnaire? Piloting something means that you have tried it out before the actual before using it in your main study. Is the questionnaire online or is it in person? And what is your response rate? Response rate, for example, again, the whole population, for example, is 100. What I want is 100. This is the full complete population, 100 individuals. So I give out the survey. I expect, I don't know, 95 response, 98, but I only get 20. I only get 20 responses. So the response rate is very low. So would this be an accurate representation of the population or not? Yes, exactly not. So what I want, which means that I have to go again and then send them again, and then possibly even beg people, maybe even look at some incentives and make sure that the response rate is high enough for me to say that this represents the population. Now, this is one method. This is a very common method in quantitative approaches. Another method, which is experiments. Again, what is your experiment? What are the variables? And what is the intervention that you're going to apply? Say, for example, I want to see if a certain approach or strategy is going to be useful in teaching English. So I have two classrooms. One classroom, no changes. Second classroom, I changed something, one variable changes. And then I start to compare. Again, there are specific statistical tests that you would do that you can show, like, compare between. So if there is a difference, and if the difference is significant, then I would say, oh, okay, so the intervention or the something that I've changed is actually significant enough and needs to be applied in all different classrooms. So we have experiments or quasi-experiments with this different type, smaller version or a lighter version, of an experiment. No, the discussion, also in the methodology, you don't talk about results at all. There is a specific section or a chapter where you discuss results. Here, you're just saying how you obtained the results, how you collected the data and analyzed it. Okay, so if you are going to use qualitative methods, for example, interview, what types of interview? You have semi-structured interviews, which is you have questions, but you allow the participants to say whatever they want to say as well. Structured, which is you only ask the questions and that's it. No more questions, nothing else. Unstructured, nothing. You just go in, have a conversation, and hopefully you get the data that you need. Now, again, this is what I mean when there are differences in terms of that the definition or the separation between quantitative and qualitative methods is not very clear. Structured interviews are considered quantitative methods. And there are such things as qualitative surveys, or open-ended surveys might be considered as a qualitative method. How would you know? Again, you're going to read and you're going to look at what is within your field, what is considered so, and what is considered this, and what is considered that, and so forth. But what you have to do is that you have to mention it in your methodology section. Are you considering structured interviews as a quantitative method? And then also you have to write your justification for that. Okay, so interview guide is basically the questions that you're going to ask. So you need to include the questions that you're going to ask in your methodology section. Did you record the data, and how did you record? Did you record the interview? Was it an audio or a video recording? And again, it depends. Would this be significant or not? How long is it? How long, and how many as well? An observation is, for example, an observation in a classroom. Who are you observing? Who are the people that you are observing, and why? How did you get access? For example, classroom observation. How did you get access to the classroom? And what is your role in this observation? Are you just going to be silently sitting in the corner and just observing? Or are you going to play some kind of role? I mean, again, it depends. And are you going to record the data? How are you going to record the data as well? Again, so if you notice, you have to actually have, again, details on your methods. You can have both quantitative and qualitative methods. You can have, again, whichever method that you're going to choose, whichever instrument, whichever materials that you're going to choose, you have to include it in your methodology chapter. After you're done with describing and detailing your methods, you are going to talk about the procedure. So I know what I want to do. I've chosen the instruments, probably even developed them a little bit. And now I'm actually going to do the data collection itself. So how did you do this? How did you send out the questionnaire? Was it via email, online, WhatsApp, all the above? How did you sit down and interview the participant? In person, via Zoom, phone, online chat, or even WhatsApp? You have to tell us. In what condition was the data collected? Time is of essence as well. For example, if you interview someone, if you interview students, or if your participants are students or learners, and if you interview them after a very long day of lectures and courses, you probably won't get anything. So you have to think, is that a factor in the quality of your data? Also, a period of time. For example, your data is specifically reflects or represent a period of time, for example, only 2009, 2003, sorry, 2019 to 2020. It does not represent 2018 or 2017. And would that make a difference? Another thing, for example, pre-COVID-19 lockdown, post-COVID-19 lockdown, during COVID-19 lockdown. So when, so the time, when did you collect the data? Very, very important. Who collected the data? Did you collect the data? Very important as well, because it differs. If you as a researcher collected the data, or if you as a researcher asked someone else to collect the data for you. For example, again, classroom research, teachers will probably collect data for you. How did they do it? Did they follow your instructions? Did you give them instructions? All of these things need to be included. Again, depending on your field or your discipline or your research aim, to collect the data, is it significant? Does it affect the outcome or not? Context as well. Context meaning the environment to a degree. I mean, in a classroom, outside the classroom, which city, which country, which university, if you're comparing between two universities, and all of these things. Another thing you need to consider is translation, and this is very important for us because in many cases, I think I would probably assume most cases, we collect data in Arabic, but we report it in English. How are you going to translate the data is something that you need to consider as well. If something unexpected happened, what was it? Why did it happen? And what did you do about it? Any questions? It depends. Okay, if I'm using mixed methods, which one is it better to start with, quan or qual? Again, it depends, because is your focus on, for example, I want to design a questionnaire. Okay, I want to design a questionnaire. So how do I know which items to include? What I could do is I interview a group of people, and based on what they say, I start designing the items in the questionnaire. My focus here is on the questionnaire, not on the interviews, but the interviews help me design the questionnaire. Maybe the opposite. I start with the questionnaire, and then based on the results, I find that the results of the questionnaire is very interesting. So I start choosing certain people that that completed the questionnaire and started asking them why. why did you answer? Why do you think that English, why did you agree with the statement that English is easy or English is difficult? So again, this actually depends on your research design questions and how you chose to answer those research questions. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, so any other questions? My methodology depends on two softwares. The first one is coding, while the second one is a simulation software, which depends on the results of the first code. So it is good if I run the test of that code within the methodology or not. First of all, wow. Two softwares. One is coding, while the second one is a simulation software, which depends on the results of the first code. I think you need to ask the experts in your field, to be honest. Does it or does it not? I'm not sure. So is it good if I run a test? However, there is something that you need to include. You need to say, for example, I did this, but then I did that because I needed to know this. So that's more of like a piloting aspect of your research. By the way, you don't include the trial and error. Yeah, you did something and it didn't work out, and then you chose something else. So you don't have to include it in details. You can say, I did this step before that step, but then it didn't work out. So I changed it and then it worked out. I can obviously in a more academic way, but that's my point. But you don't have to extensively describe the piloting or the procedure that you have done. If you have a small sample size, again, is it a do you want results? Do you want generalizable results, or do you want to understand a specific phenomena? What is it? Sorry, فجأة كده سلكتت الأسئلة. Just a second. I'm trying to read the questions. I'm sorry. Where is it? Where is it? There is these info should be written in the proposal or in the dissertation. Okay, in the proposal, what you want to do. In the dissertation, what you did. So what is it that the proposal is what you want to do and why you chose this specific instrument. So procedure in this case, what you might do. I'm going to contact them and blah, blah, blah. But in your dissertation is what you actually did, which means that it's going to be longer, definitely longer than your proposal. Just a second, I'm just trying to read the questions. Sorry if I'm taking a longer time reading questions. I need to explain maybe what I have also. Okay, I have a small sample size. I think I answered that question. Can you repeat format? Again, it depends on يعني الformat of your the instrument itself. This information should be, again, yes, if it's what you want to do, what you have done. you make sure that it's not too long. I mean, make sure it's concise, that the important details are there. Understand specific phenomena, generalized. Can you repeat the format, please? Depending on your, for example, what is your instrument and how it's supposed, what's the format of your instrument? A questionnaire has to look in a certain way. For example, a questionnaire starts with a greeting and then maybe demographic at the end. ماني عارفة حسب الفيلد. But then you items, what kind of items are you going to use, Likert scale or not, and so forth. An interview guide, for example, you start with your questions and then you allow participants to add more and so forth. So it depends on the actual instrument. Okay, so each instrument has a different kind of format. By the way, when I mean unexpected complications, say for example, you tried your questionnaire and you realized it doesn't work. I mean, there are different ways to test the questionnaires as well. I mean, this would probably, it differs from one field to another, and piloting the interviews as well. So you've tried them out. And then something happened, unexpected complication happened. If this complication affected your design, so you changed your design based on that complication, then you would include it. But if it has no effect whatsoever on the research process, then it's irrelevant. So only include things that are relevant to the research process. Okay, any other questions? By the way, the way that it's actually structured is usually the way that you're going to collect your data and analyze it. So you do think of your sample first, you approach them first, you ask for access, probably even have to, depending on your research, ethical approvals, and then you understand them more, and then you choose your instruments, appropriate instruments, you develop them, and then you start with the procedure, which is your data collection, and you pilot them and you keep going until you've reached a point where you feel that you've done enough and you've collected the data that you need. And then afterwards, you analyze your data. And this is basically kind of like how you would structure your methodology section. So it kind of, again, reflects what you have done. So after you have collected your data comes data analysis. And data analysis differs from quantitative and qualitative data. Usually with quantitative, you would have to use a software. The ones that I know are SPSS or R. And these are statistical software. I'm not sure if there are any other kind of software, or maybe within your field, you develop your own software that, or you're testing a specific software, or you've created one, whatever. But the point, usually you have something that helps you with your statistical tests. And you have to think about preparing data. This is what I mean. Preparing data, for example, is changing the variable, changing the I agree to 3 and neither agree to and disagree to 2 and then disagree to 1. So you're preparing it, you're cleaning it and making sure it is ready for your to test, basically. In doing so, you're looking at reliability and validity. Does anyone know what we mean by reliability and validity? These are very, what does that mean? How do I know if something is reliable or whether it is valid? Yes, and quantitative, not the same results, but you can, yeah, kind of. That's reliability, Amal Asiya, that's reliability in quantitative. In qualitative, you will never get the same result. So the way I measure or the way the criteria for reliability is different. Validity refers to whether whether the method or the instrument that I've used to measure something actually measured it. So what I want is instruments and research process and the whole study has to be valid and has to be reliable. The criteria of determining whether the research or the study is valid or reliable differs from quantitative and qualitative research. It's not the evidence, it's whether the evidence is valid. Yes, it again, whether it's actually measuring what I wanted to measure, whether what it was intended to measure. And reliability means in quantitative that I can replicate it or repeat it. In quantitative. However, in qualitative, results are not necessarily the same. So I ensure reliability with different criteria. In quantitative data, statistically, you would determine if something is valid. I think. In qualitative, you would consider something as valid in the method of collecting data and describing it and including it in your thesis or in your paper. أرجع وأقول لكم, this actually depends on the field. So each and every field has its own way of, well, in quantitative is a statistical matter, but in qualitative, it depends as well on the criteria that you want. But regardless, it needs to be discussed in your methodology section. Because you want a valid, I mean, valid is, well, you need, and we're both important, but you need to make sure that you ensure that your study is valid. Okay, statistical tests, again, depend. For example, I mean, maybe some students know about t-tests, ANOVA, and COVA in terms of SPSS, looking at correlation, looking at significance of certain things, using the software and what that means. Again, if you are good in that sort of thing, then you would understand what it means. I don't necessarily know what it means. I know if something is significant, if the paper tells me it's significant, and I trust the paper, depending on the journal, of course. But in terms of qualitative, you have to look at the different strategies and approaches to collecting the data. For example, a very simple example, you conducted an interview with someone and you transcribed them and you analyze them, and then you give them back to the participants, and the participants would tell you, yes, this is valid, this is correct, this is what I said, this is what I meant. Then this is a form of ensuring validity. Whereas in quantitative data, you don't need to do that. You most likely don't even know who your participants are. They're anonymous to you. Whereas in qualitative, you know them and you sat, you had a conversation with them, and you probably get even really close to your Qadim. Okay, so another thing that you need to consider in the qualitative is transcription. Transcription, if you recorded audio or video, you have to change it into text. So you sit down and you transcribe your data in order to analyze it. If you're going to do what kind of data analysis, is it content, thematic analysis, so forth, all of these things depending on what is it that you want. Coding, reliability, and validity, again, it differs. All of these things, again, if you know more about the research approaches within your field, you will be able to, you have to report it. It has to be part of your methodology section. Any questions? Okay, just quick important tips, because we've reached the end, I think. Just quick important tips is throughout your research process, always remind yourself of your research questions and your research aims. Because what happens is that you collect a lot of data, many of it is very interesting, but it does not relate to your research aims, which means that it should not be included in your thesis. So when you're collecting data, make sure that you have this in your mind. Also, you have to convince your reader that you have chosen the best possible research approach to answer this question. So if you're going to choose quantitative, qualitative, you have to make sure that it's clear that this is the best and these are the justification for it. And one important way of doing that is obviously presenting it, and then also cite your sources. Important to cite sources to confirm that you understand what you're doing, obviously, that you're justifying it and presenting support for your choices, and also that you understand established practices and concepts within your field. And this is very important for your audience. If you want to do something innovative, please do, but again, make sure that you justify your choices. Know your audience. I cannot stress this enough. If you are writing a thesis, know who your examiners are. Even look them up, see their research interests. What kind of questions that they usually ask? If you want to publish, look at the journals, look at the papers that they are publishing. Instruct an assignment, again, understand your instructor. What is she telling you? What is he telling you? What do they want from you? So you have to know your audience. And a very simple one is, which is a very common question. I know it seems very odd, but it's a very common question is, which tense do I use? Usually use the past simple in the passive form. Because you're saying, you're telling your audience what you have done. And the importance is on the actual data and the process and so forth, and not on who is doing it. Although, if you are in some fields would say, no, it is important to know the role of the researcher within the research, and therefore you might have to use the I. Past simple. Passive, past simple. No, because you haven't done it yet. The proposal, you haven't done it yet. You're going to do it. Again, why are you using the past simple, and why are you using the past? We're using the past simple because you're telling your audience you have already done the research. You have already collected the data and you have analyzed it. And that's it for today. So any questions?
Okay, any questions, dear attendees? Actually, we would like to thank you, Dr. Nashwa, for the exceptional, informative, interactive, and wonderful presentation. In fact, we learned a lot. Most of us, and if not all, we learned a lot from your excellent presentation, and we hope that we'll have more and more in the future about research and research methodology for our graduate students.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was our pleasure, actually. Any questions, dear attendees?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was our pleasure. And thank
And
you.
Vivo, I did conduct a workshop, but not with the not with the Academic Writing Center.
Wallah, it was very, very excellent and very exceptional, in fact.
Thank you very
And
much.
we hope to meet you again and again, inshallah, and make use of your presentations in the future, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And a big thank goes to the attendees, those who, mashallah, came to attend such a useful and exceptional presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Inshallah, within 24 hours, the recording of the presentation will be on the YouTube channel for the Academic Writing Center. Those who are interested in the survey, I posted the link 3 times so far, and I'm repeating it again and again. So please fill in the link within 1 hour and try not to be late. Thank you, everybody. It was our
Thank
pleasure.
you so much. And thank you for the Academic Writing Center and everyone there for a tremendous job that you're doing. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has attended.
Thank you, Dr. Nashwa. That's very kind of you. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Inshallah, we'll see you next Monday with citation management with the Zotero and APA style 7th edition basics. Will be presented by Dr. Basim Al-Amri. And next Wednesday, we'll have another fantastic workshop about understanding and avoiding plagiarism. Again, for graduate students by an excellent doctor, Dr. Adel Abdurrahman, inshallah. You'll enjoy them and you'll benefit a lot. So we'll meet you, inshallah, next Monday. Till that time, good night. Have a nice time and see you on Monday. Thank you.